What can an empty bird feeder teach us about consistency and soul winning? We'll talk about that in just a sec. Welcome to the show. I'm Daniel Dalp, and this is For Your Sunday Morning Drive, the short podcast with the goal of providing some motivation, drive, and encouragement on your way to worship and helping you recenter your mind on those spiritual things on a hectic Sunday morning. I hope you're having a good one. I hope the snowpocalypse of 2026 hasn't taken too much of a toll on you. And regardless of if you're hunkered down in your homes or you're on your way to worship this morning, I'm thankful that you're listening. If you have a moment, I would love it if you would share us with a friend. That's the best way to help any podcast grow. And man, I'd love to have as many of you riding along with us as we can. Well, let's go ahead and get the show on the road today. This is episode 94, Empty Feeders. Let's go to church.
Are we there yet?
I have a confession to make. As many of you know, I delight in watching the birds in my backyard at all times of the year, but especially in the winter. Well, I've really neglected my feeders over the last few months. I've just gotten real busy, and life has been kind of heavy, and honestly, with everything going on, it seemed more like a chore and a burden than something I really enjoyed doing. So I just moved it on down to the bottom of my priority list. You know, down next to those things that don't really matter. So I left them empty. But with all the recent winter weather and snowpocalypse 2026 on the way, several weeks back I started filling them again. And I noticed something interesting. The feeders were full, they were in their usual spots, they had good seed in them, but there was not a bird to be seen. Even on one of the coldest days we've had this winter, not so much as a sparrow. Nada, nothing, zilch. And it took several days before I saw the first feathered visitor returning to my yard. And even after a week or two, I'm still not seeing the birds show up in the same numbers and varieties that I did last winter. So I asked myself, what changed? It wasn't the birds, and it wasn't due to migration. It wasn't the quality of the seed. It wasn't the location of the feeders. And it wasn't even the weather. It was the lack of consistency. You see, I had let those feeders sit empty and unattended for so long that the birds no longer expected to be fed. They no longer knew where to go for food. And when the promise of a good meal is taken away, the birds will find it somewhere else, and they'll just stop coming. Now, sitting on that realization for the last week or so, I couldn't help but notice the spiritual application. Are we empty feeders? You see, so often we sit around in our church buildings or stand behind our pulpits looking out at the lost, and we say things like, well, people just don't want to study the Bible anymore, or no one wants to come to church anymore, when at the very most we are content to stay in our church buildings and stand behind our pulpits. Well, Jesus tells us this in Mark 16:15. He says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." Now partner that with what Paul says in Romans 10:14-17. How then are they to call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without a preacher? But how are they to preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news of good things. However, they did not all heed the good news. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our report? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. All of this going and preaching and teaching, it's pretty active. And it seems to me that maybe it implies that the burden to make sure the lost in our communities know where to be spiritually fed is on the faithful, not on the faithless. That maybe it isn't good enough to put up a church building or put up a sign or to even hire a new preacher, but that we must all be out there scattering seed consistently. Because it's all about consistency. If we've stopped feeding those around us with the Word of God, we're hiding the feeder. At the very least, we're leaving it empty. Don't hide the feeder. Don't hide that light under a bushel, so to speak, because if we do, we might contribute to spiritual starvation. Paul has this charge concerning consistency and spreading the gospel in 2 Timothy 4:2-5. Preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and exhort with great patience and instruction. For the time will come when they will not tolerate sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires. And they will turn their ears away from the truth and will turn aside to myth. But as for you, use self-restraint in all things. Endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, and fulfill your ministry. You see, those are words that we can all take to heart. We often blame the lost for not hearing a gospel that we refuse to preach. And friend, that's an awful lot like being upset with a bird for not coming to eat from an empty feeder. And when that feeder's empty long enough, they'll find food somewhere else. So we have to ask ourselves, are we consistently teaching the gospel, or are we just consistently empty? Well, those are my thoughts for your Sunday morning drive. Now it's time to hear yours. Our discussion questions for this week are, do we consistently share the Word of God with others? If not, what's holding us back? And what can we do this week to make sure those around us are spiritually fed? Hey, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of the show and sharing it with others. I hope you are safe and warm this week, and I hope it's a good one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you Sunday.
We're here.